who was a vassal to the Median kings. This vassal was named Cyrus, and in 550, he ends up leading a revolt against Media and takes power. He's able to take the reins of the Median Empire and actually eventually take Lydia as well. Cyrus is known as a great king for many reasons, not just through his military conquests, but also as a king who was a benevolent ruler, a king who, unlike many of the kings that we've seen, didn't impose heavy state taxes, organized religion, these sorts of things. What he did was to allow conquered peoples to maintain their own localized identities within the Persian Empire. And that was true of Lydia, that was true of many of these peoples, which is very, very good policy for governing a large space. He ends up claiming descent from the royal family of Anshan. He actually says that his father was Median king, and his mother was a Lydian princess descended from Croesus. So in this case, he's claiming lineage both from the two of the major powers, right, of this period, from Lydia and from Media, which again is very politically savvy, even if it might not be true. In 539, Cyrus marches south to Babylon and encounters a Babylonian king named Nabonidus. Now Nabonidus, in terms of his popularity, he was a very unpopular king in Babylon for a number of reasons. He was greatly influenced by his mother, of all people, who was a priestess of the god Sin. And we've encountered Sin before, right? Sin is the moon god. But in this case, worshiping Sin in Babylon is kind of a no-no, right? Again, Babylon is dedicated to Marduk and Shamash, and as a result, Nabonidus was very unpopular, especially when he tried to move the capital of the Neo-Babylonian Empire away from Babylon into the city of Timah. This was a very bad move. We can see Nabonidus attempting something like Akhenaten, what Akhenaten tried to do at Tel el-Amarna, a shift of state religion, and just in the same sense that it didn't go well for Akhenaten, it went very badly for Nabonidus. Nabonidus returns eventually to Babylon, to boos and hisses, we're told, and by the time that Cyrus arrives, he's actually welcomed with open arms. And this is partly because Cyrus portrays himself as a savior of the Babylonian people. He takes advantage of the unpopularity of this Babylonian king to essentially step in and take over without a fight. According to Cyrus, and again, it's a bit of a biased source, the people of Babylon welcomed Cyrus with open arms and proclaimed him king. And actually, even in some of the writings that we have from Nabonidus himself, Cyrus is said to be a worthy king, or a good king. So they did have correspondence leading up to this point. The Greeks hold him up as sort of a pinnacle of a proper ruler as well. Just a very popular king across the board. We know a lot of this from Cyrus through his a particular object known as the Cyrus cylinder. And this cylinder was deposited by Cyrus underneath the Temple of Babylon as a foundation deposit. It's a very interesting object for a number of reasons. It's got about 45 lines of Akkadian text, which really sort of lay out the process of Cyrus establishing his rulership in Babylon. It's very political and interesting. For one thing, he adopts a number of the titles we've seen already. King of the four corners of the world. In addition, he calls himself Great King, King of Persia, King of Anshan, King of Media, King of Sumer, King of Akkad. It goes on and on and on. So we have this establishment of Cyrus as king. In addition, also his genealogy, right? Having Median and Lydian roots, that's also established too. So right, with that said, he then goes on to bash Nabonidus and talk about how Nabonidus was neglecting the Babylonian people, how the temples were falling apart, and how he was from low-born origins and really didn't deserve to be king in the first place. So he talks about these offenses and how he is a more righteous king. And this tablet then goes on to say how Marduk himself, the god Marduk, ended up calling forth Cyrus to enter Babylon and become its new ruler. And actually it goes on to say, and I'll read a little bit of the cylinder. In Nabonidus' mind, reverential fear of Marduk, king of the gods, came to an end. He did more evil to his city every day. His people brought ruin on them all. Or he brought ruin on his people, using a yoke without relief. Marduk inspected and checked his countries, seeing for the upright king of his choice. And he selected Cyrus, the king of the city of Anshan, and called him by his name, proclaiming him aloud for kingship over everything. So not just Babylon, right, but the entire empire, Lydia, the whole 9 yards. In this narrative, the text then switches to the first person, and we actually hear Cyrus proclaiming, "I am Cyrus, king of the world, great king, powerful king of Babylon, Sumer and Akkad." And he goes on to describe a number of his pious deeds, bringing peace to Babylon, rebuilding houses, rebuilding temples, and allowing people to return home. Because it's under the reign of Cyrus that the Babylonian exile of the Jews comes to an end. Cyrus allows the Jews to return to Jerusalem and rebuild the temple. And for this, he's actually proclaimed as being anointed by Yahweh. Cyrus is looked upon very fondly by the Jews as well for allowing them to return to their homeland. So this cylinder, which lays out the justification for Cyrus's rule, his rise to power, and his right rule over Babylon, is a very important document. It's also a document that's poorly understood in a number of ways. This cylinder is often cited as the first true example of human rights. And you'll see translations of it that state everyone is allowed to worship their own God, to pursue their own interests in peace, that Cyrus wouldn't rule over anyone that didn't want him to rule over them. And actually, these are not in the cylinder. So for this reason, often you'll see the cylinder trotted out as this declaration of human rights. That's not quite the whole story. Although Cyrus, of course, does allow the Jews to return home, he does allow people to maintain their own cultural identities within the Persian Empire. There's no explicit statement of human rights per se. So for that reason, the cylinder was a copy of the cylinder used to sit in the lobby of the United Nations, and I don't believe it's there anymore for this reason. But you'll see a number of false translations from this cylinder. That said, again, it is a big shift away from some of the policies of the kings we've seen before. So moving on. Cyrus decides to build a new capital at the city of Pasargadae in Persia. This is the site where apparently one of the last battles was fought, and to commemorate it, Cyrus decides to build his capital here. It's also central to the empire and acts as a nexus, along with these roads that branch out of it, to really effectively control what is now the largest empire, actually, that the ancient world has ever seen. To do this, Cyrus actually imports a number of workers. He draws on the talents of the people that he's conquered. For example, there's no tradition in this region, in Iran, of any kind of stone masonry. There's no stone architecture, so he actually imports Lydians from Anatolia to help build his capital. And this is really a formative stage in Achaemenid architecture and develops into the very distinct character, mixing traditions of various regions that we'll see. We can see that this palace area is really a very large garden with pavilions set into it. It's an open structure, which is very characteristic of Persian architecture. And we can see here two major palaces, Palace S here, which has an audience hall, and these columns, which are incredibly high, 36 feet in height. And this columned hall takes the name Apadana. Particularly later in the Achaemenid Empire. But the Apadana, or meeting hall, is a reception hall. Is something that we see at Pasargadae and will continue to flourish at sites like Susa, and finally we get to Persepolis tomorrow. Again, drawing on Median architecture, drawing on Urartian architecture, those columned halls again being very central. The site of Pasargadae, as you can see, while it's fortified on the outside, the interior of the site is very open, which sort of projects this harmonious image of the empire at peace, right? This is not a citadel which is very well defended. This is almost a pleasure garden. And you can see here, while the gardens, of course, died long ago, the excavators were actually able to find the water channels that fed these gardens, set aside by another palace, Palace P, to the north, and two pavilions, B and A. So it would have been quite a beautiful site overall. And at the site, we find a number of reliefs. This is actually the oldest Achaemenid relief that we have, and this is of Cyrus himself. And you can see the way that Cyrus has chosen to depict himself, right? This is a king who now rules over a vast, vast empire. And again, just like the palace, which draws on these different techniques to build it, the art that Cyrus decides to use draws on motifs from the entire ancient Near East. So, right, you can see these wings, of course, which look very, very similar to our Neo-Assyrian Apkallu figures, those winged geniuses. And at the same time, he's wearing a very Egyptian crown at the top, this Atef crown, which blends Neo-Assyrian and Egyptian motifs together into one composition. This relief actually has two inscriptions on it. One is by Cyrus. The later one is written by Darius, who will come quite a bit later in 521. We'll get to Darius in a moment. Darius ends up writing on this that indeed Cyrus was an Achaemenid. We'll get to the reasoning behind that in just a moment. But this inscription is actually written in three different languages: Old Persian, Babylonian, and Elamite, just to give you a sense again of the diversity that Cyrus is going for. Cyrus is killed in battle in 530 BCE. He's buried in a very simple stone structure with a gabled roof at the top. And this is actually very similar to the way burials are performed in Lydia. So again, maybe Cyrus is drawing on his Lydian roots in death in this case. But this raised central building, which is